I want to thank EuroSPI, also the ECQA, for helping to sponsor my attendance and participation. When I was invited to give a keynote, I chose not to give an overly technical talk. Technical in contrast to practical, or in contrast to accessible. Also, as you notice, rather than being multimedia, I'm unimedia or monomedia. I'm just going to be working with words. I have words to share and words that I've heard that I'd like to comment on. You won't miss anything if you just close your eyes, if it helps you to concentrate. But I'll wake you up again in time for lunch. I chose to focus around a term of integrity. And once again, I appreciate the opportunity to think and work through this idea. Anyone who's given a presentation or had to teach a lesson knows that you get much more out of the preparation than you are able to communicate, and unfortunately than the people in the audience are able to learn. So I have had a long time to think about this. I had a long time to repent of my choice. I even asked once if I could change my topic, and Richard said it's almost too late. We're going to print. But I said, no, I will stay with that because I think it's important to deal with that aspect. And I have probably done my share on the technical side. This conference is going to be recognizing a 20th anniversary next year. I realize I have just passed a 30th anniversary of giving technical talks in the area of software quality. And before that, of teaching in the public schools, where I also now teach at the university level. And so I have tried to communicate for a long time technical information. But what I want to indicate is I think there probably are even more important things that we need to be thinking about, and I'd like to take the opportunity to share with you. And that's why I focused on the word integrity, and also gave me a chance to think about and do some word association with integrity. As I think Richard's already indicated, one word that comes to mind is integrated, pulling together. And I would suggest that one aspect of integrity at an individual level is pulling yourself together, having a single focus, having a wholeness, which is a healthy sort of thing too. One of the difficulties I find, and probably most of us find in our professional and our personal lives, is we're pulled in so many different directions. My attention span is such now that I'll actually start to do a web search, and by the time I start the search, I've forgotten what it is I was searching for, but I find something else of interesting. And it's sort of like chasing the rabbit down the rabbit hole. You sort of follow all these different directions. But if you don't have a focus to pull you back, you feel so scattered and you don't necessarily feel productive and you don't feel that you've been on task. And so one aspect of integrity is integration just at the individual level, having a wholeness about you. And then, obviously, in this kind of group and in other groupings that you're in, part of the integrity is how you present yourself to others and how you try to work with others. If you think from the point of view of the kinds of themes of this conference, I think we can also talk about the integrity of the software products, the processes by which those products are developed, and the people that develop them. And of course, we are the people. And in the famous saying of one of the cartoon characters many decades ago, we have met the enemy and it is us. And so there are many ways in which we need to deal with ourselves at a personal level. And I don't think we've talked about that, at least in focus, very much throughout these sessions. I've picked up some words and some phrases I'd like to talk about that I've heard today and yesterday and Monday. But I think what I, with your indulgence, will do is try to focus on the personal side. But I will say a few words about the other aspects of integrity, because the most obvious integrity is of the product. And we're thinking about software and software that contributes to systems. And I think that part of the motivation clearly that we have and those people we work with will have is that software is important. I think almost every technical presentation begins in some way by saying, at least as part of the motivation, why we need to deal with getting this software right. If not, in some cases, people literally will die. Space probes will not be successful. Businesses will not be able to accomplish their purposes. Government agencies will not be able to provide services to the citizens. So at one level, I think we recognize that software is important, and therefore it's important to do it right. So at the most obvious level of talking about integrity, we use that term to talk about the integrity of the product. And so over the last 3 days, I've heard people talk about integrity levels, safety integrity levels, automotive safety integrity levels, motorcycle integrity, safety integrity levels. And it is a recognition that it is important that the software function properly, but we're also sophisticated enough and engineering-oriented enough to know that there are certain types of integrity and levels of integrity that are significant. The old saying that's said about the difference between looking at a glass of water that's half full, probably heard the idea. A pessimist looks at the glass of water and says it's half empty. An optimist looks at the glass and says it's half full. An engineer looks at it and says you built the glass twice as big as it needs to be. So we don't want to overbuild any system. If you only want half a glass of water, make a smaller glass. Saves on materials and energy and the effort. So if there's an amount of effort that's needed for a certain amount of integrity, make sure it's appropriate. And so all of these models and all of these schemes that people are looking at are trying to take an engineering approach to let's get the right amount of integrity. And it's certainly the case that software may be much better than we think or we build, but the real idea of the integrity is how much assurance can we provide? Because quite honestly, if the software is that important, the consequences of the software not working are things we don't want to discover after the fact. One criticism that's been made about software engineering is it's not really an engineering discipline in the way that it's scientifically enough arranged to do a controlled experiment. But I would contend we really don't want to do controlled experiments. For example, we have 2 different avionics systems. Put half the planes with system A, half the planes with system B, and see which one crashes the least. We don't really want to do that. We want to have assurance before we fly in that plane, or before we turn on that banking system, or before that medical device goes into use. And so in many cases, as with the instances I've just mentioned, there are regulatory regimes in place. There are agencies that have to be satisfied that you're not going to harm the public, or that you don't have an undue ignorance of whether you might harm the public. And I think in every case we want to have that kind of assurance. So the integrity of the product is partly about not only building the quality in, building the integrity in, but having the proper level of assurance that you have enough integrity. And then from an engineering perspective, not building in more integrity or insisting on more assurance than is appropriate. And of course, then there is a judgment involved in did we make the right decision? Did we use risk analysis? Did we use all of the evidence? But integrity of the product is something I think we all have in the forefront at this sort of conference and in other settings. And I think it's quite significant. But I want to spend more time on the other aspects, because I talked about the integrity of the product, but it depends on the integrity of the process and of the people. And obviously, The process is in the midst of the very title of a software process improvement conference or software process improvement initiative. And I think we can recognize that having the proper process, having integrity in your process, is a necessary, if not sufficient, condition for having the integrity in the product. We don't want people just to say, any sort of way, put that product together. Certainly in terms of having assurance, we know that the software itself is so complex, so immaterial and essentially invisible, that the task of trying to provide insurance just by looking at and exercising the product is so daunting, it's probably something that no one would think would be practical. We can't just test the product. We can't just inspect the product. So the second dimension that we rely on is to also do the assessment of the process. So we don't just worry about here's the product that comes off the end of the assembly line, but how did it get there? And of course, it's not just a purely mechanical assembly line. So much of the quality discipline comes from the idea of controlling the repetition of a manufacturing process. My primary professional affiliation is the American Society for Quality, and as Richard may have already alluded to, the software division of the ASQ has been a great partner of the EuroSPI and a number of the other initiatives. But the difficulty in the quality community, when it grew up out of a manufacturing environment, is to recognize or focus almost exclusively on the manufacturing or the replication process in software. That's the most trivial process. I can stamp out as many thousands or millions of units to duplicate the medium, the CDs or whatever else that I'm going to embed the software and deliver it in. It's a design issue. And the quality management and the quality discipline is a little bit less advanced in understanding design issues. So I think talking about integrity of process is quite significant. And I do appreciate the process models. In fact, if you look at one of the other words that we see a lot is the word maturity. What is the idea of maturity? Think about that word. Think about talking about whether something is mature or the kind of thing that people get criticized for being immature. I'm not pointing at Michael. And we have an image then of making a judgment and having at least an expectation that there is a growth towards maturity. And maybe we can't necessarily define it. I know we try to define maturity levels, but we have an expectation that things will grow towards some idealized or optimized state. And so again, in talking about maturity of processes, we're talking about some sort of integrity, that the process coheres in a certain way, that the process can be described and recognized. And if you make a claim about the process, you should be able to substantiate it. You should have some honesty about your process, and the process itself should have a cohesiveness and a wholeness to it. If you think about what we mean by integrity, we can talk about structural integrity for a building, for example. Will it withstand the pressures if there's an earthquake or if there is some other insult upon it? And so from a product point of view, integrity could be equated with the soundness of the product. But integrity also deals with a kind of wholeness that comes, I think, more to the fore when we talk about the integrity of a process. Is that process really something we can define? Do we actually have a basis for describing and following a process and having confidence in the process? And so I would claim that the second thing, beyond just the product integrity, we really should be thinking about is the process integrity and the solidity, because all of this is very abstract. The solidity of the software, we call it software because it's not very solid. And we talk about a process definition and assurances because it's not that solid. We need evidences. And so I commend all of you who are working on defining and assessing and improving processes, because once again, that's necessary, if not totally sufficient, for producing the products with the integrity that we want. But then the processes don't run themselves. And so the third and the most significant aspect of integrity I would indicate would be the people. And with the integrity of you as an individual, unto yourself and in the way you relate to others is really what I want to be speaking about now. In thinking about other words that dealt with integrity, and particularly thinking about it from an individual level, another word that came to mind was sincerity. We talk about someone being sincere. And I don't know if you're a scholar of the Latin language, but it turns out the word sincere comes from two Latin words which mean without wax. Does not mean you cleaned your ears. You don't have any wax on you. It means that when you're looking at a statue, a marble statue, if that marble statue was flawed in some way, a less than honest, a less than sincere person would cover up the flaws by putting wax in the cracks so that on the surface, the statue, the structure would look complete. But if there were cracks that were filled in with something less than the solid marble, the wax, it was not of a wholeness. It was not sincere. It was not without wax. And so I would suggest that when we talk about sincerity of individuals and sincerity of relationships and any of the other areas of integrity that I'm talking about, the idea of not putting the wax, not puttying up the cracks, but having the wholeness, the integrity of being all of one piece. And part of that is, as an individual, that you act consistently. That you don't start to think about, well, in this audience I say this thing, this audience I say another thing. I remember all the way back in the days as a graduate student, I had a job at the university working with the environmental agency. And to this day I remember my boss because he would go to different audiences and he had a particular saying that he had. This was decades ago, and so maybe people weren't as environmentally sensitive. His saying was, the solution to pollution is dilution. If we can just water everything down or spread it around. I come from the nuclear industry, and we say the real way we should handle the nuclear waste problem is just give everybody a spoonful of the nuclear spent fuel to take home with them. If we can spread it around far enough. The problem is when it's concentrated. But the thing about my boss then was he would use that saying, the solution to pollution is dilution. And in one audience, he would mean that as a positive thing. He was actually talking to people who believed that. And then I would see him a short time later talking to a different person, a different group, and he would know that person would have a different attitude, and he would tell that as a joke. He would say that as a negative thing. I mean, you've heard of the saying of people who talk out of both sides of their mouth. He didn't have to do it at the same time, but for one audience, he said it in one way and tried to get along with that audience. And with the other audience, he said the same thing, but with a different meaning and with a different intention, and tried to please that audience. I would say he was not sincere. I would say he did not have integrity in that way. And I think part of your professionalism, another key word that I value highly, your being a professional is having the integrity of your judgment, that you're not swayed by different audiences to say different things to please different people. As a software engineer, I know that there is an established code of ethics and professional practice for software engineering that a couple of the major professional societies have written and supported. And most of you, in any other setting of a professional society or certification, have probably signed on to a code of ethics or have ascribed to a code of professional practice. One of the key ones in the software engineering code, and the one is probably similar in most other professions, is the idea of independence of your judgment. And so part of the integrity of the people involved in the processes of making the products is the independence of their judgment. Now, the judgment depends on having the information, having the facts, having the data. So part of your obligation, part of your integrity is being open-minded enough to ask for and to receive all the information that will be helpful in your making the judgment. One of the very derogatory terms in the English language is prejudiced. If we tell someone they're prejudiced, that's not a good thing. If you break that word apart, it's prejudged. You have prejudged. I look at you, and just because I don't like people who wear purple shirts, I'm prejudiced against you. Just because I don't like a particular culture, a nationality, or ethnic or religious group, because I say something before I ever meet that person, I have prejudged that person. Your obligation as a professional at both a personal level and a technical level is not to prejudge. A famous humorist once said that it's not so much the problem of the things we don't know, it's all the things that we do know that aren't true. And so when you prejudge, you're bringing to bear information that you're bringing into a situation which may not be correct or may not be complete. So my challenge in terms of professional and personal integrity is to certainly stand by your judgment, but make sure it's an informed judgment. And the informed judgment means you're open to, particularly open to, contrary views, painful information, inconvenient facts, and that you're willing to incorporate that in your process of making a judgment. And then once you have made that judgment, you'll stand firm in it, and that you'll not compromise, and that you'll not say, oh, I need to please this audience or this boss. I can speak truth to power if necessary. I've never had to threaten to quit because I was afraid they might take me up on it. But I could imagine situations where it may become an issue of your integrity to say, no, we can't ignore that fact. We can't ship that product. You don't have an adequate basis for making this decision. Let me give you some evidence. Let me tell you what my judgment is. And that's particularly an issue with the kind of pressures we have in the software development world. One of the things that's said about software products is they never really get released. They only escape. And so one of the things that I think is your integrity should be involved in is making release decisions. When do we ship this product? Or when are we ready to move to the next stage of this development? And in order to be the professional that you need to be, you need to have an informed decision. You need to be open to the facts. You need to be data-driven, evidence-based, but then stick by that decision. Stand firm. Stand up as necessary and show that integrity, because you don't want to be one thing in one setting and one thing in another and just be like the ship that's blown back and forth by whichever way the prevailing winds are blowing. Oh, I'm ready to do the sermon now. Let me mention a few other words that I've heard here and help unpack some of those in this context as well. One of the words that I heard that I like is the word community. They were trying to build community. And actually we have different communities. The working groups that met on Monday are continuations of and milestones along the way in building communities. The organization that I work with back in the States is particularly looking at something, not a new idea, but something called a community of practice. And we're looking at the way in which we can bring practitioners together in community. Let's do another little word analysis. The word community ends with the word unity. There is some cohesion. I'm back to integrity and cohesion again. A community has unity in it. It has unity because the first part of that word, community, implies there's something in common. There's unity in commonality. There's some commonality of interest. I don't know whether you just didn't have anything better to do this week or not, but I take it that you have an interest in what is being discussed in this setting, and so we have that in common. When you get to self-select in the smaller sessions or the work groups that met on Monday, you select it, you vote it with your feet. You chose to go into room 7 or room 8 or here, not because the chairs were more comfortable one place or the other. I don't think they are, because I keep seeing the chairs moved back and forth. Thank you very much. But you had some common interest that you and the other people who came to that room had some commonality. So for at least a few minutes or hours, we had a community. It was a transient community, but we were united in a common purpose of listening to and discussing a particular idea that we thought we had in common an interest about. And I think the challenge and what we're seeing as one of the successes here is to keep that community together. We certainly have the technologies now that we don't have to always fly around the world to get together in the same place, to have that sense of unity. I still think that's significant, important, and once again, I'm thankful for this opportunity to be here. And I commend those people, particularly the ones who had farther to come or was more sacrificed to be here. But we can continue to build community using some of the technologies, not to replace, but to complement the ways in which we get together in person. I heard a number of other images. Okay, you gave me extra time.
No, how much did that?
Yes.
The book on this? Okay, I give you extra time. Sorry. Yeah, 6 minutes.
All right. One of the words that I heard here was a think tank. I think in your opening slides you talked about a think tank. Yes. And we also have seen an awful lot of structural images, diagrams, block diagrams with things flowing from place to place, very schematic sorts of things, very mechanical things. Again, welcome to the world of engineering, process modeling, standards mapping, lots of really fascinating diagrams. Let me suggest that one diagram I didn't see, or one type of illustration I didn't see, was a more organic one. Now, I'm not going to scare anybody by showing some very minimal art ability here, but in my own notes, I sketched a few trees. And I thought about the way in which some of what we want to achieve as community and as maturing individuals and organizations have a more organic image to them. So once again, if you can visualize, without the help of any projection, if you can visualize something organic like a tree or a bush, a plant, a flower growing, I think there's some aspects there that I would commend to you. any plant, any tree has roots. And those roots are the underlying principles, the underlying things that you cling to, the support that you have. And I would suggest that in your professional as well as in your personal life, there are roots that you need to have and you need to put down and you need to deepen. If it's a commitment to the scientific method, if it's a commitment to process, it's a commitment to our understanding of social organizations, quality management, all of those are the things that are the bedrock principle that we build upon. And without that, we're too easily uprooted. The wind blows one way, the wind blows the next. One of the criticisms that's made in the quality discipline is there's a fad of the week or a fad of the month. And someone will get excited about Six Sigma, and they'll get excited about Lean, they'll get excited about process, quality improvement teams, quality circles. They'll jump after ISO 9000, and they'll jump after something else, and you're sort of blown one way or the other without those roots. Now, and all of those things are good things, but if you're just following the most recent fad or trend, I again would contend that you're not showing integrity. Part of this integrity is the rootedness of building upon something that's substantial that you can cling to, and you put those roots in deeper and deeper. But of course, just having your roots in the ground is a pretty static image. And so if you think about what's happening above ground, in order to grow and to flourish, certain things have to happen. We have to add nutrients. We have to have the water. The rain has to fall on the tree. And I would suggest that that's part of what you're doing or could be doing in a setting like this. You're getting new information. You're getting nourishment by the addition of nutrients, intellectual nutrients, conceptual nutrients. You're learning new information, you're developing new skills, and you should welcome that. Because if you cut yourself off, you're cutting yourself off from the rain and the nutrients that you need. Every now and then we have to pile a little bit of fertilizer on. But basically, there are ways in which you are enriched from outside, and that's why, once again, being in community is helpful because you receive that information. But also the sun shines. There is an energy that's transferred into that living system. And I didn't completely work out this analogy, but I think part of that energy, that sun that's shining, is enthusiasm and encouragement. And once again, that's something that you need to be able to accept from outside of yourself. So I would hope that one of the things that also happens in this and other settings to help you grow and to flourish is you're receiving encouragement and inspiration that energizes you. You've got all the raw materials, you've got your roots down, but putting those nutrients, all that raw material together, building on your rooted foundation, needs the injection of energy. And so I find that I come back from settings like this energized. And I need to sustain that. I need to go back and look over my notes. I need to go pull my business cards out and contact, I'm going to give you some more information. May not be in touch with you. There are all sorts of ways in which we need to continue to sustain that energy and that enthusiasm. And letting the sun shine, and then being the sun that shines on other people. I think we should be open to asking for honest feedback. As we say, don't ask a question to which you're afraid to hear the answer. But even more so, don't ask a question whose answer you're afraid to act upon. And that's part of what happens in the whole process improvement arena. Someone does an assessment, someone finds a strength and then an opportunity, and you're not going to grow or you're not going to improve your process unless you act upon those insights. It may be painful, You may be in denial about some of those shortcomings you have, but if the other people are also honest and have the integrity in talking to you, and you're willing to open to that, you can improve as an individual the same way that we want the organizations to improve through process improvement. I heard a phrase mentioned, which I know people talk about when they say it's not rocket science. They're trying to say this is not that difficult. I'd rather say it's not brain surgery. Because quite honestly, rocket science is actually quite easy. And I've taught physics, and I've done this in other settings. I give someone a balloon to blow up. And after there's some air in the balloon, I say, let go of it. And the balloon flies. And I said, you now have demonstrated and can see the principles of rocket science. It's that simple. It's just action, reaction. One of Newton's laws of motion, it's been demonstrated. We've known about that. We've talked about it in physics for centuries. Rocket science is not difficult. Rocket technology is. Making that action-reaction occur with a controlled explosion of millions of tons of high explosive materials with a valuable satellite or some astronauts sitting on top of that just a few meters away, and having that happen in a controlled fashion so that in 8 to 10 minutes they're in orbit. Now that's quite challenging. So it's rocket technology, not rocket science. I say that simply because it's the same thing with other issues we talk about here and other places. The underlying science or principles are not that difficult. It's the application. It's the technology. So I would claim that the principles of process improvement are things that really didn't turn out to be very difficult. It's the application. It's the technology. It's the actual improvement process. And that's where you have been challenged, and that's where you're to be commended for working in many, many ways. Whether you're trying a lightweight assessment, whether you're trying a industry or sector-specific adaptation, you're taking the principles and you're applying them in specific situations. You're doing the hard work of rocket technology because the principles are really much more readily understood. So let me wrap this up in terms of talking about integrity and how integrity can apply and ought to apply if you have a oneness, if you have an integration. We talk about, one of the phrases that people use is you should practice what you preach. I'm going to say that you should practice what you practice. That in other settings, you, in various ways and to various extents, have been very good at analyzing, identifying, and working to improve. Why should that be restricted to one part of your life? If you have integrity, if you have a wholeness about you, it's nothing that's content or domain specific about those types of skills and activities. And so I would suggest that you not compartmentalize your interest and ability in practice of process improvement just says, well, it's software. I would claim that you could use that in larger settings to improve organizationally, to improve at various societal levels, and even in your own personal and family life. I don't necessarily flowchart my daily routine, but there are ways in which we can be more open and honest and evidence-based to drive the way in which we ourselves are better. We can be better professionals, we can be better people. And so to bring the whole idea of integrity back to the focus of you as an individual, I would urge you to practice what you practice in other settings. Practice those activities of setting goals, of identifying gaps in your ability to meet those goals, and work on the ways in which you can improve the personal as well as the professional task that can help you meet those goals. Going back finally to the term of maturity, we all want to grow up. I'm still not sure what I want to be when I grow up, but we all have some ideal of the mature person, the mature organization. And so if we continue to keep our focus on that, we continue to practice that with integrity, with honesty, with a wholeness, and with an openness. As the Apostle Paul said in letters to one of the early churches millennia ago, when I was a child, I spoke as a child, I thought as a child, I acted as a child, but now that I have become mature, I put away childish things. And I would encourage you at both the professional and the personal level to put away those childish things that you can and become a person of integrity. Thank you.
Okay, do you have questions? Question? Okay, then I have one. The issue is we had the saying in the past, a fool with a tool is still a fool, okay? And the same applies, a fool with a process is still a fool. Yeah, so what you are saying is, and I understand it this way, when you don't find integrity, in the combined sense of the process, the person, and the product, it will still not work. Yeah. So, can you comment on this?
And as a matter of fact, that very saying was an earlier note that I made to myself, because we do have powerful tools, not just the technology, but some of the skills that we're looking at could be used in very inappropriate ways. And you probably have seen or unfortunately been in the midst of someone who has not done a good job of a process improvement initiative or not done a good job of looking at adherence to standards and so forth. I think that you're quite right that the fool is the person that doesn't have the understanding or the integrity to use the tool properly. And the more powerful the tools are, the more powerful the processes are, the two-edged sword is that you can do more harm. And unfortunately, not only can you do harm with that tool or that process, but you bring that tool or process into disrepute. And so as much as any of the slogans or any of the fads, so-called fads that I've talked about, are good, solid things, if someone goes and says, I'm going to do Six Sigma, and does it in a particularly inappropriate or inept way, then you've poisoned everyone's attitude, their mind towards the idea of Six Sigma or whatever process improvement you have. I think one way that I would segment populations and identify fools, and this is a sad story I have about some of my own students, is there's a difference between being extrinsically motivated and intrinsically motivated. And the student that wants the grade just for the grade is motivated by that external motivation. I heard it in a couple of settings in this conference that people talk about, if all you're trying to do is to get that certification, or I'm a level 3, or I'm compliant with this standard, if you're extrinsically motivated, all you're trying to do is get the good grade. And whether you call that person fool or that's a foolish approach, it's certainly a very inadequate approach. The intrinsically motivated person, and what you hope you can do is make your organization become more intrinsically motivated, is the reason you want to improve is because you want to do a better job, you want to produce a better product, you want society to be a better place, if you can be a little bit idealistic there, and not just because you want the check mark or the certification seal. And so I would say that it's the personal integrity and then applying it to the organization that you shift from being extrinsically motivated to just get someone else's approval to get the good grade to being intrinsically motivated because it is the right thing to do. It has benefit to yourself and to others.
Okay, now do we have a question? Yeah? I have another topic which I would like to ask you. I know you're hungry, but there are still 2 minutes. This is, I remember one statement, because you mentioned organic, okay? And we had a project which was called organic, because we had exactly the same belief like you, that there's an evolution. So it's not only the process, it has to change over the time, and maybe we have a completely different view 2 minutes later, Heisenberg. And so we have a kind of probability how it moves in the future. And what I would like to ask you is an example which we used at this time. It's systematic thinking or systemic thinking. There was an example which I used in the past, some of you know, when the people built the big water plant in Egypt, the electricity plant, with the big, how's it called, the Aswan, at this time, they mentioned that Sudan will become the Garden of Eden back, like a few thousand years ago. Do you know why it failed? Why do we have 5 million people dying when there is sunshine and when we always have to spend money there? Why did this fail? Because one or a few persons believed that they don't have to exchange knowledge with other fields of expertise. Because when you take away, and the same the Russians made with Lake Sevan, when you put up a lot of water, it presses the groundwater level down. Okay, so when you add water, it always presses the groundwater level down. When you take water away during the storing phase of putting water in from Sudan, it also puts the ground level down of water. When you later refill, it stays with the lower ground level of water. So the end effect was there's an Aswan water plant, but they had to even dig deeper to find any water in Sudan. Okay? And there is no cycle back. This is what you said, organic. It's evolutionary. It's collaboration. It's the sun that gives the nutrients, otherwise the plant is not growing. We don't understand the cycle. And I think if we are not integral enough to network, we will always miss this bloody cycle. Okay? So thank you, and now it's lunchtime.